Hello, everyone. My name is Leo Vasiliou, former DevOps practitioner and author of the SRE report. Whew. Wow, that's a lot of words to simply mean someone who cares about reliability and internet resilience. I've been with Catchpoint for just over 10 years, and first and foremost, want to say to take a moment to say thank you for giving us some of your precious time today. And welcome to our masterclass, our first in a series of masterclasses. Brendan, if you don't mind, you want to take a second, introduce yourself, say hello to everyone.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brendan DeLap, tech enthusiast and senior solution engineer at Catchpoint for the past decade. And like Leo said, I'm definitely looking forward to our chat today. And thank you very much for spending some time with us today.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Brandon. And I suppose let's go ahead and jump in, shall we? So uptime versus experience. I thought I'd start with an anecdote, a little personal story here. So last summer, we had a high school graduation party for our daughter, and the type of party where you look for some old embarrassing baby photos to plaster around the house, plaster around the out for friends and family to come and see. And I was like, oh wow, look at this. The store down the street has a print shop, so let me just go online and order some. So ordered some banners, some posters, and I was like, yes, winning. Said, Leo, your order went through and it will be ready for pickup tomorrow. So tomorrow comes, but when we went to the physical store to pick them up, that's when all hell broke loose, so to speak. So I walk up to the counter, said, hi, I'm here to pick up order number, whatever it was, 1, 2, 3, 4 for Leo. So the employee behind the counter goes over to the computer, and Brandon or anyone on the call, tell me if you've heard this before. Click, 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 clack, clack, clack. Bear with me, Leo or Mr. Vasiliou, I suppose I said, our computer is slow, right? Click, 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 clack, clack, clack. And after about a minute, maybe minute and a half, which felt like eternity when you're standing there in real time, they were like, we can't find the order. And so the employee, I guess, called the super secret hotline, the bat phone, and trying to find out what had happened with the support person. And they got into an argument, and things escalated quickly because they couldn't find it. They couldn't resolve what the issue was. And even though I was the quote unquote customer who was trying to pick up their pictures, I actually started to feel bad for the person behind the counter, because I was able to infer that the person on the other line felt like things looked good from their end, right? So my experience was disrupted, the workforce or the experience of the employee was disrupted. I could tell that they were using different computer systems to try to accomplish the same thing. And so it got me to thinking, Brandon, it's like, where were we, or where are your customers, your workforce, your employees, your partners, etc., performing their digital interactions? Here, right next to your clouds and your servers in your clouds and data centers of your primary application, or here, right? So there I am in the bottom right in Enzo's restaurant. And Brandon, I think I see you there over on the left side taking this webinar from the West restroom. But either way, I hope everyone will generally agree that your customers, your workforce, your API clients, etc., are working from these different types of locations these days. And one thing that we all have in common is, in this day and age, right, the internet is your your new network, and we're all going across the internet in its stack of components before we even get to your application stack. And those stacks are going to be completely different for your customers versus your employees. And they're even going to be different for different customers and different employees, right? It's like, say, each one of your customers has a unique fingerprint because they all have a different array of stack components that they go through just to get to your application. And I suppose now, Brandon, that we've given a little bit of this contextual precursor, maybe you could, getting back to the whole uptime versus experience, maybe you could elaborate on the challenges of the difference of that inward focus of uptime versus the end user experience. Because as we heard in my opening story, right, that support person on the phone didn't see any problems on their end, and resulting in that escalation when I was in the store. So maybe you could kind of take it from here and elaborate a bit.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Leo. Although I'm more likely to be the one that's slamming my laptop on the table in the room next door because the LA internet congestion. But anyways, let's take the Adobe outage that happened on 12/8 as a great proof point that monitoring the customer experience from their perspective versus just uptime is extremely critical. Let's assume that I'm an observability practitioner for a popular news app, and I'm tasked with the overall observability of our customer-facing services, i.e., a revenue-generating web app. If I were to consider only monitoring uptime as a simple HTTP 200 OK from our primary URL from within our cloud infrastructure, all of my internal dashboards would be green for an extended period of time. However, before, I would have heard from social media that users couldn't read articles, or from our RevOps team, that we weren't receiving any revenue at that moment in time. Now, if I were to consider monitoring the complete user experience by, running through a multi-step transaction from cities and ISPs that my users actually traverse, I would probably been able to detect within moments of the first failure and identify the party or provider that was causing the event and notify the dev team to remove the tag until those services were restored. Now, monitoring the entire internet stack from the end user perspective could have prevented a large disruption to our user base, like long page load times, or even in cases, blank screens due to the tag manager not loading appropriately, and even kept our customers from sending those mean tweets and jumping over to the competitor's sites. Now, this was just a recent example of uptime versus user experience, and unfortunately, these events happen too often due to the growing complexity of the internet. Now that we've set the stage, let's talk about adapting your strategy to focus on the most important part of the equation, the end user. But before we do, let's go quickly through this evolution. So, it started when everything was on premise, before the idea of cloud, basic monitoring and alerting. Everything was monitored in silos. We had to instrument our own infrastructure monitoring. We used SNMP, Flow, captured some packets, et cetera, et cetera. Well, basically, all focus was put on the servers that you owned. But then this thing, cloud, came along. We started moving to someone else's data center. We went from having to instrument infrastructure telemetry ourselves to simply just getting it from that cloud provider. And traditional NPM also had to be rethought because, well, the internet became the new network. And traditional NPM could not evolve the same way as cloud native. We also started this capability evolution of monitoring to observability. With the rise of APM trying to be proactive, but those agent-based APM tools could not be installed on, third-party platforms like CDN, DNS, or your API providers. All of those things that still impact your brand revenue and reputation, but that were outside of your control, so the confines were still within the four walls of your organization. And that's when the idea of IPM came to be. A modern evergreen approach to directly focusing from the outside in on your end user's experience. And the approach is starting with the end user's experience. And the idea here is in order to prevent an incident impact from being realized by your customers or your businesses, the concept of preventative. So just to put a finer point on it, we can't prevent incidents, but we can work to prevent the impact of incidents from being realized. And given that's the core value add of IPM, and the need for it will only continue to grow. Bringing it back to the news site example, if I were to rely solely on APM, I would be focusing on logs, traces, and infrastructure metrics with no ability to proactively test from where the users are, therefore a lack of visibility into global and regional performance, and any internet or third-party dependency would be left as a blind spot. Whereas if I were to implement an IPM strategy and start measuring from my user's perspective, whether it's a user coming from an iPad in the Caribbean or someone on their phone about to take off from LAX, any of those critical third-party APIs, cloud gateways, and internet service providers that a good experience absolutely requires would be within my observability strategy, and I would be the one to get to go to Caribbean relaxing with a drink in hand. So why don't you ask yourself, do you currently have the visibility to catch what matters? Traditionally, about 95% of your observability budget comes from the logs, tracing, and metrics, compared to 5% on IPM. However, only 20% of incidents are considered to be related to your infrastructure. So as we talk about evolving to advanced IPM, do not fret, because Catchpoint can help instrument internet monitoring for you. And when it comes to your next observability strategy conversation, just simply don't be a Joey in this case. Over to you, Leo.
Thanks, Brandon. I'm just taking a moment to process and hoping that I'm never a Joey. All right. So, team, this phrase of best practices is, always a little bit of a moniker sometimes because, right, there's so much context, so many dimensions, so many contributing factors here. And when we talk about your monitoring or your incident management programs, before we jump into what we're talking about here is like our thoughts on how to approach things from an end user perspective. Just kind of keep that in mind, that it is exactly from an end user's perspective, where we sort of work to change the perspective and the paradigm of what we're talking about here, right? So if you go back to that little graphic of Enzo's Trattoria, where we say people are working from, it is going to take a little bit of a shift, but as Brendan had pointed out a moment ago on the last slide, right, we've instrumented this monitoring for people. So having said that, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in and talk through these, right? Monitor what matters, monitor from where it matters, take the time to learn, and don't go it alone, where each of these actually have a couple of sub-bullets. So if we go ahead and jump in here, we want to talk about monitoring what matters, monitoring your customer experience. So Phoebe said it best, all right? The customer experience is all that matters. And while that is essentially the main point or the main talk track of this initial masterclass, there's a little bit more to the story here. Because there's also a cost effectiveness play here. So the story does go something like this, right? We all have logs, so we build some type of tool to collect logs. But logs are just data, and we need to transform those data into something with value, something that we can actually look at. So we build dashboards or buy a dashboarding tool. Then recall the evolution slide. We need to instrument our application. So we buy an application performance monitoring tool. Then we modernize our digital product service delivery. So we start using things like containers and microservices, and all of a sudden we have to buy tracing tools and so on and so forth, just to sort of keep up with the times, or at least think we're keeping up with the times. But when we stop to take a look at the Frankenstein that we've built over the years, the hodgepodge, we realize that we've been collecting so much freaking data, and it's costing us so much money, and it's not giving us any value at all. So these are a couple of proof points that I pulled literally just last week, because these types of posts I'm seeing more and more on my feed about how much the cost crisis of internal application and observability tools are. It's like, I once misconfigured a project and ran up a bill over $1 million. It was all, vendor name hidden, and I got zero value from it. Or according to this data from an IBM blog post, generating 1.7 meg for every person for every second on Earth. And just kind of take a second and let that sink in, right? Intentional pause for 1 second. And so my question is we sort of we're following the current, collecting all this data, but if you see something in this internal data and it doesn't impact the user experience, that's really hopefully a crystallizing moment for people to kind of at least start the conversation about thinking the perspective. So instead, collect observations about the experience and work backward from there. Right now, you can rethink the way you sample internally. You can rethink the frequency, level of instrumentation, level of detail with which you're collecting your internal data, right? Because if the question is, how do we know if the experience is impacted? Well, again, just to answer that question and emphasize our first best practice of monitor what matters, start with the experience and work backward. Don't start with the data and then indirectly try to attach to the user's experience. Now, since this is a masterclass, we're going to also cover a topic regarding service level objectives. And I believe, Brandon, we keeping in mind that this initial masterclass is setting the foundation for some subsequent ones where we're going to go into some pretty nitty gritty detail. Right, you monitor or you measure your indicators like uptime or performance, and then you have them established against objectives. For example, if uptime is an indicator, then your uptime objective may be some number of nines. If performance or rate-based performance is an indicator, you might have them go against an objective of 99% of response times under 1 second, and so on and so forth. But what we want to highlight here when we talk about the shift to an experience perspective as it pertains to SLOs is to remember that this experience is cumulative, right? So in this hypothetical, simple but hopefully still powerful example, if you have 6 services, each with an SLO of 3 nines, then the effective SLO of this hypothetical page or application or digital experience is 99.4 pardon me 99.4%. In other words, if you were to focus on those internal SLOs, you actually run the risk of misunderstanding what the potential experience is like. So as I mentioned, we'll get into SLOs and some of the other pillars in future masterclasses, but I thought this one was important enough to cover here. So that was monitor what matters. So now talking about monitoring where it matters, here's an example on the right of a real-time snapshot of users around the globe interacting with our Catchpoint products and services. And each one of those dots on the right has their own version of Enzo's Trattoria, has their own version of Sal's Pizza, or has their own version of Starcoin's coffee shop, right? I don't know if I could say Starbucks coffee shop on the webinar, but the main takeaway here is that each one of those dots, each one of those users, each one of your employees, your workforce, your partners, your providers has their own performance fingerprint, right? Different ISPs, different Wi-Fis, and I mean, they're essentially wandering nomads at this point because they could be working from any different location in any different day. So you need the ability, or you need the capability to match as close as possible their unique performance fingerprints. So this idea of monitoring from where it matters, right? Think back to the Adobe talk track that Brandon talked us through and my little opening anecdote, right? The idea of monitoring where it matters is this idea of the next best practice. Let me just take a quick peek. Okay, so we'll come back to that Q. There's a Q&A question we'll come back to just to get through these best practices, and maybe we can save them for the end. But so the next practice that we want to talk about is taking the time to learn. So as I mentioned in the beginning of the webinar, I am the author of the SRE report, right? It's the fourth year that I've written it, and I've spent years looking at the data. And this one I thought was relevant, especially given the theme of this year's report. But it's not a matter of if incidents will happen. It is, in fact, a matter of when. So this visual here, the source of the SRE report 2024, which we published last month, as you can see, 80% of over 80% of orgs said they responded to dozens or hundreds of incidents, ticketed incidents in the last 30 days. And I thought this was a powerful stat because it also corroborates, I recall a study we commissioned Forrester for, where they said that the average or midpoint average number of incidents on a monthly basis was 76. So I feel like we have two completely separate data sets from two completely different cohorts corroborating and saying the same thing. But going back to this idea of learning is take the time to dedicate safe, protected time for learning. Be blameless, be transparent, and embrace incidents when they occur honestly and humbly. Now, this last one here I wanted to touch upon. Don't go it alone. So again, this is from this latest SRE report. How many third-party providers does your organization use for the following service categories? So 92%, I mean, you can almost kind of say everybody at this point uses third-party platforms. 92% use at least one third-party platform. And the question only presented a handful. The survey, when we wrote the survey, only presented a handful of third-party platforms, right? So if you think about all the different types of third-party platforms that are in existence, that's why I said basically everybody uses at least one third-party platform. But the second stat was over 80% use multiple third-party platforms. And this idea of things on the internet, things outside of our control, is what I wanted to highlight as we now kind of take a peek at the second slide in this don't go it alone best practice. Is, do you agree practitioners should tactically monitor productivity or experience impacting endpoints even if outside their physical control? And then we even broke it down by organizational rank, right? Individual contributor, team lead, managers, directors. But when we say don't go it alone, essentially what we're talking about is incorporate to federate your playbooks, your run books, your exchange of knowledge to go beyond the scope of your organization's four walls. So establish functional teams that will span organizational boundaries. Consider a dedicated digital experience team or center of excellence. And, when we talk about emerging trends, think about, for example, obviously AI has been trending for a couple of years now, but how will the openness, sorry, I didn't mean to double redundant there when I was about to say open telemetry, for example, but how will things like open telemetry impact the way you incorporate or federate your third-party providers, right? And so now, now that we've kind of covered those best practices, Brandon, I think we should probably take a moment and show our obligatory advertisement slide, right? So the Catchpoint platform, purpose-built from the ground up to help lessen the frequency, duration, and impact of incidents before they affect your workforce, your application, your network, your website, your customer experience, consisting of our products here. So synthetic monitoring, internet synthetic monitoring, real user, BGP, endpoint, gold standard web performance, web page test, internet sonar, and tracing. So that brings us to the end of our presentation. So let's work to wrap this up. Brandon, before we do, any closing thoughts or comments before we work to open up our poll?
Yeah, I would definitely just say it again, right? When it comes to your next observability strategy discussion, just don't be Joey.
Don't be Joey, indeed. All right. So having said that, what we'll do now is we'll go ahead and open the poll. If people could take a moment to navigate to the poll tab, what I'll say is we hope that everyone enjoyed our fresh, concise approach to this foundational masterclass. The experience is all that matters. And we look forward to seeing you in our next masterclass. Let me just do one last check in the Q&A here, right? So I know this is up, but can these services be seen as services we can source into AI ops solutions? Yeah, so, right, so let me just repeat that because I was reading the question and realized I may have been not speaking to the mic, right? But so can these services be seen as services we can source into AI ops solutions? And then there's a vendor name here. So the short answer is yes, absolutely. So whether, really what we're talking about here is the API economy. So whether you're pulling data from what I would consider to be a traditional REST API, or you want some real-time data aggregation from our webhook, what I would do is I would actually go back to this slide here and just say that those different types of APIs can either push in real time or pull from these sources, at your own schedule, right? And then also, like, think about things like our tracing, our synthetics, our internet synthetics. That's where our support for open telemetry comes in as well. So things like, whatever languages are supported by your open telemetry should automatically be instrumented as well. Are we going to have a recording of the session with the slides? Yes, this is being recorded and links should be available tomorrow. Okay, so let's see, there's another one here. So this question says, on this slide, which I happen to go back to, synthetics versus internet synthetics, can you elaborate a bit? Right. So, if you were to Google synthetic monitoring, peruse various websites, you probably will read that synthetic monitoring is synonymous with monitoring your websites and your APIs. So I think, I'm generalizing a little bit here, right? So we offer synthetic monitoring, but Catchpoint is the only IPM platform in the world to offer peerless internet synthetic monitoring, which is basically synthetics on crack. So it takes the concept of proactively monitoring your web and APIs, but then extending it to dozens and dozens of protocols in the internet, as well as monitoring from the largest observability network in the world. But more importantly, the idea of having the flexibility to adjust the coverage and types of telemetry that you collect. So yes, there's your first mile monitoring, there's your mid-mile monitoring, there's your last mile monitoring, your multi-access wireless, obviously the real user, you can see the endpoint, everything's incorporated. But again, just to summarize, synthetics versus internet synthetics, synthetics being for your web and your APIs, but internet synthetics being unique to Catchpoint for many more protocols, many more connection types, because like we said, everyone has their own unique performance fingerprint. So we need the ability to match those performance fingerprints. Brandon, okay, one more. Your slides talked about this a little bit, but maybe could you talk about Internet Sonar?
Yeah, definitely. So as you can see on the screen here, Internet Sonar is one of the products that Catchpoint has in their portfolio. And it helps answer the question, is it me or something else? And what we're doing there is, over the 15 plus years of experience that we have in this specific space, we're essentially taking all of our locations globally, as well as the different monitor types that we have available. And we're going ahead and testing these critical services for you, whether that is a third-party provider like Adobe Tag Manager and the other services that Adobe actually supports, or different ISPs, different CDN, different infrastructure service providers, so that you can, figure out whether or not it's just you and your specific application and your users that are seeing that issue, or is it the entire world or a specific region that may be seeing that same issue. So that's a product here within Catchpoint that is extremely complementary to your existing synthetic, as well as your RUM and tracing.
Excellent. And I think that simplifies it, right? Is it me? Is it somebody else? Am I the only one? Alrighty, team. I don't see any more questions.
There's actually one more. Yeah, I can jump in here and take this one. So there was another one. Is there an on-premise release on the roadmap? So Yeah, so it's already been supported since day one. We support installing your own nodes on premise, whether that's your cloud infrastructure or on premise site locations, and we call those enterprise nodes. So that is something that we support today, and it's bringing all of the excellent stuff that we do from the outside in perspective, and allows you to monitor from the inside those same protocols and services.
And a critical call out as it pertains to enterprise nodes or on-premise is 100% of the feature function capability set of the massive global infrastructure also extends to those enterprise nodes. So it unlocks additional use cases. For example, your CI/CD, being able to have a normal, consistent measurement by the same performance tool from the beginning of the life cycle all the way to the end. So you're not, I don't know, measuring with feet and inches in the beginning of your cycle and measuring with the metric system at the end. I don't know if that was a good analogy or not, but yes, 100. Okay, goodness. I guess we're not done, Brandon. Can we have a cluster? Yes. So I think of HA, high availability. That's what comes to mind. Hopefully that's what I understood the question to be, but the answer is yes, absolutely. And then, the super magic pixie dust has the intelligence, right, if there's an issue. And then as far as like what we technically call a node, they also can be technically in different, pods, et cetera, et cetera. But yes, absolutely. All right. All right. Any other questions or comments from anyone? All right. Again, my name was Leo Vasiliou. We'll wrap up with just saying thank you again for your time, and we hope to see everyone on the next masterclass. Cheers, team.
Hi, everyone. Thank you.